Hi everyone, good morning. So today I have a special episode for you, and I've called it Should You Write a Book? So my name is Vidya Math, I'm an author and a poet. First of all, I want to ask you how you are today. Sometimes we start our day and no one's asked us that, so how are you today? And so the topic of today's episode, should you write a book? So first of all, I think there are many people who say that they have a book inside them. And that's very true. Everybody has their own story, and there's a huge value in sharing our experiences as people with one another, because then we can learn from one another. We can also take part in, if exciting things have happened to people, then we get to learn about them and can kind of experience a bit of that ourselves. So there's a great value in sharing our stories, and I think perhaps that's part of the reason why people feel that one day they would like to write a book. The other aspect is, of course, that we're human beings, and we need to connect. We want to connect, and having that sort of being able to tell our stories is cathartic for us, but it's also cathartic for other people, because other people might be experiencing similar things, and when they read your story, they might feel like there's a person out there that understands them, because sometimes within our own circles we may not come across people who necessarily understand exactly what we're experiencing, and that's nobody's fault, and that's the same of how other people might feel about us. But that's why it's good to have a wide pool of where we can draw on experiences from. So to come back to the topic of should you actually go ahead and write a book? So there are many factors that will affect whether or not that happens. First, does somebody have the time and the energy to write a book? Writing a book can be incredibly time intensive and incredibly energy intensive. And I have found that when I've written books, I have to kind of allocate that time in my life purely for writing books. So, you know, I'll eat and stuff if I sometimes, to be honest, I've sat and written a 7-hour shift, and I'm not even sure whether I've eaten or drunk that much in that time. And I really have found that if the time and energy is not available consistently, then writing a book can be impossible. And I think maybe that's also part of the reason why a lot of people don't end up writing books, is literally they don't get round to having an opportunity in their lives where there's this big chunk of time that they can just give their life to. So I'm not saying that that opportunity has been made available to me readily, but I think I felt compelled to write the books that I've written, and therefore have, shall we say, sacrificed other aspects of my life so that I could actually write these books. So then what happens after you write a book? You might have written a book for somebody, and if that's the case, I have written 2 books for birthdays, so as birthday gifts. So those books were written for my sister, and she loves to read those books, and the feedback I get from my sister is very strong. So she loves to read, she's always loved to read, but then have to bear in mind she also loves me. And so her feedback is that she loves the books, and she gets very emotionally involved in the books. Some of those books are very emotion triggering. So if I listen to my sister's feedback, the impression that I would have is that generally the books are going to be absolutely loved. Now, the books are loved. I'm not saying they're not. But what I would say is if you do write a book, then get some different opinions. So there are the people that you love and the people that that love you, and they are very capable of giving you a certain opinion. Not all of them. My father will give me a very different type of opinion. He doesn't say anything negative about the books, but he doesn't give me the same feedback that my sister gives me. Like he will, for example, if I ask him who his favourite character is, he'll get very offended and he'll say, well, of course it's so and so. I mean, I wouldn't know, of course it's so and so. It's only from you telling me, Dad, that I know that that's your favourite character. But there won't be anything else forthcoming from my dad. I just know that he's read the book, and the fact that he talks about it at all, very limitedly, is a big thing for my dad. So he's clearly found something in it. He interprets the book in a totally novel way. I wouldn't have ever come up with that interpretation, but that's also going to be true of a lot of your readers if you write a book. So what I would say is allow other people to read your book. So in your circle of people that you know, you might have people who are quite cynical, people who have different viewpoints from what you have. And I would allow different types of people to read your book. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but different characteristics, people who have different characteristics to read your book. And then see what their reaction is. Sometimes they might hand you the book back and say nothing. So they've read it, but they have said nothing. Once somebody did this with one of my books, and I just thought she didn't enjoy the book. She just gave it back to me. She didn't say anything. About 14 years later, that particular hand-bound copy of the book, I was just looking in it because I wanted to see how I'd bound it. To this day, I can't remember how I hand-bound those books from such a long time ago, but I found that there were a few pages at the back of the book that I had left empty when I was binding it. And she had written a letter to me in those pages saying how much she'd absolutely loved the book. She went into great detail to describe how she'd felt about the book. And for 14 years, I had thought that she didn't like this book. I had no idea she'd written in the back of the book. So you might get responses like that. You might get responses where people hand you the book back and they don't say anything. And they haven't written anything anywhere either. You could ask them what they thought. They may not be honest with you because they might like you as a person and they don't want to say to you, it's really not my cup of tea. Other people might read the book and they might be very emotionally affected. They might tell you that you would obviously have feelings about that, and then you can talk to them about it. Some people will love your book, genuinely love your book. And, my sister loves my book, so that's genuine too. But people that are less close to you, they might love your book and they will tell you. I recently had some feedback about one book where someone read the book and then literally pinned me down by my arms, like got a hold of me and said, but I want more, like I want a prequel and I want a sequel. And they were very serious about this, and I totally get it. I also want a prequel and sequel to those books, but the question is, when will my life afford an opportunity to write those? And that can hit you really hard when people ask you for a sequel. For one of my books, the request for a sequel has been from every person that has read the book, and it's been a desperate request for a sequel. It hasn't been like, oh, is there going to be a sequel? It's been hard to watch readers saying to me, is there a sequel? Is there a sequel? Can there be a sequel, please? And that's hard for me because until the sequel was written, the sequel has been written, it's not been published. And it's still hard for me because I can't say to people that the sequel is available. So you have to be prepared for things like that. The other thing that you have to be prepared for is look up, if you're thinking of using a publishing company, look up the reviews for those publishing companies that you're considering. And if you have pages and pages on the internet of people telling you that it's a scam company, that they're not a good publisher to publish with, that they do things with your work like they might not, you might present them with a book that has perfectly good grammar and correct English if you're writing in English, but you might get that book back and it might have been, say, proofread by someone who doesn't know how to speak English. This is a real thing that goes on. And if you've signed a contract, say, that the publisher has rights, this can actually happen to your work. And that can be one of the most soul-destroying things. If you've put your life into writing a book and you end up in this situation, the mental, emotional, physical trauma that you can end up with is so substantial that you could wish that you had never ever written a book. So the recommendation I would give is do your research very well before you launch with a publisher or sign anything with a publisher. If you can see reviews where people are unhappy who have submitted their books to a publisher, and you have plenty of people saying they're unhappy, if you do sign with them, you're signing with the knowledge that there are loads of people out there who have suffered deeply. So there are options. Nowadays we have options. So I have friends who have published by themselves. So on Amazon you can self-publish. If you do that, I haven't done it myself, but if you do that, my impression, and I have to do it myself before I can tell you anymore, but my impression at this point in time is that you would have quite a lot of control over your book. So if you work with a publisher, you will be working with people who will present you with cover designs. That can be very traumatic. So if you want to avoid that sort of trauma, it might be a way forward. Again, look into what is said about self-publishing online, talk to people who have published online, find out what they say, and but my impression is that you would have more control over your book cover designs, the language that you're using in the book as well, so that's something that you can look into. Something that I read recently about that is that it doesn't really come at any humongous cost to you. Of course, there's the time cost. If you employ an editor, if you employ an illustrator, I don't know anything about self-publishing, but you would have to look into probably pretty watertight contracts, legal contracts, to make sure where the rights are split for your book. You can always have a go at illustrating your own book. That might be cute and entertaining for you and your readers. The other thing I'd like to tell you about is something to consider is where does the book go from there, and what are your expectations? Because your expectations are very important. Now, if you wrote the book for somebody and you give them the book and they love it and the buck stops there and your friends read it, your family read it, and everybody's happy, you're happy, then that's totally fine. However, if your sights are also set on publishing the book, and if you have hopes for how well your books are going to do, there are some things I would love for you to know about this. So firstly, the world has changed a lot in the past. Books were a big thing, you know, and nowadays we have a lot of different media, So if you have a story to tell, you have many ways of telling it. You have many ways that are less time intensive, that have less editing needed, that are more immediate. So if you write a book and you publish it, it could be, and this has happened with me, there could be a time scale of 14 years between writing your book and having it published. Now that was purely because I forgot about the book, I forgot I'd written it. But even if you set out to write a book and you work intensively on it, and then it is published reasonably quickly afterwards. If you publish with the publisher, there may be quite an unknown time limit and quite a lot of struggles involved in the process to getting to publication. So one has to be mentally prepared for it, emotionally prepared for it. What I would say to you is that there is no way of being mentally or emotionally prepared for something like that. So please think about it carefully before you enter into contracts. I would also have a think about what are your expectations, because if you're thinking your book will go out there, and this is not dependent on how good your book is, if you have the expectation that your book is going to go out there and sell huge numbers of copies and stuff, there are many things you have to look at. The world has changed for a start. So we live in a world where people go on their phone, they watch something for a very short while, and then that's it. They've had their hit. Whether or not anyone's going to pick up a book and actually read it is a realistic consideration that you have to take into account, and something that you have to assimilate, and really assimilate, before you embark on, say, publishing, or having an expectation of how the book is going to do. Books will have their own journey, and if there's a way that you can accept that they are going to have their own journey, you can help them, you can try and promote them and stuff. Whether or not that works is another matter, but you have to be aware of realistically what's happening. So one of the ways is that you can look on the internet and find out what are book sales nowadays. What is the average book sale? The average book sale I have read is 100 to 250 copies per book. So that means if that's an average book sale, there are lots of books that don't sell at all, and there are some books that sell a lot. That can put you through the ringer, because you might not know why some other book is selling. And say if your book is not selling, it might cause you trauma, and that might have nothing to do with your talent and nothing to do with the quality of your book. You have to remember that there's a lot of stuff going on in our world nowadays. So it's different from the past. There are impressions about books and authors that prevail, and they prevail because they existed in the past, but they're not necessarily applicable to today. So they are things that an author has to think about, because if you invest time, money, energy, your emotions into writing, you also have to be prepared for if the outcome is not going to be an outcome that you've hoped for or imagined. So how do you deal with that? Like, say you get to there and you have to deal with it, and it could go on for a long time, that you're dealing with that. You've been through all the struggles of getting nice cover designs, getting your book edited, writing the book in the first place. It might have been years that you spent doing this. And then, so how do you manage if the outcome is not something that you hoped for? Every person that comes across your book is going to share in your experience of what you've written about. So you might be writing fiction, you might be writing fantasy, you might be writing autobiographically, and those experiences are worth sharing. And where they don't decide maybe, but where they end up having their journey in this world is valid, whatever that journey is. And you're having taken the trouble to write a book and to share your story is never diminished by, say for example, how many book sales you had, or if some people didn't like your book so much. The fact that you did it is amazing. And if you have a story inside of you and you haven't got the time to write a book, you haven't got the energy to write a book, you don't know how to write a book, I'll probably in a following episode give some recommendations and some tips and tricks on writing books, but I won't cover the scope of that like in this video. But if you have a story to tell, do explore other options as well. There's plenty of options on the internet, I'm sure you know already. And you can test the waters. You can test the waters in terms of responses from people, your reactions to responses from people, and then you can take it from there. And the other thing you can do is you can put questions in the comments below this video, because if you have questions, then I can answer them in further videos. So do subscribe. If you put questions in the comments, do subscribe. And then if I have answers for you, I'll put them in further videos. So before I finish, I'll tell you a small bit about my journey in writing. When I was very, very young, I did have poetry published somewhere. I can't remember where. I've never been, the type of person that kept a record of where all my stuff was published. I have been a songwriter. I had a song in a movie. Luckily, I did actually buy the DVD of this movie when it was being sold, and I even went to see it at the cinema, which is a good thing that I actually did that, because I think I'm the kind of character, I kind of do some work and then I do what's needed for the work and then don't think about keeping a record. So if you do some work, keep a record of it. Otherwise you're not going to remember where it was ever done. Yeah. So this is it's a fairly lengthy video, but what I have to tell you about this, I've barely touched the surface. So I will tell you more as time goes on. And right now I want to wish you a good day, and also I hope that you're looking after yourself. I write because I I want for my books to help people. And you may not have read my books, but I still have that feeling in my heart that I wish for you that you have strength today, that you have joy in your day, and that good things come your way. So I will see you again soon. Take care.